Okay, welcome everyone to another one of these Route 66 oral history interviews, partially funded by a generous grant from the National Park Service. My name is Tom Peters, Dean of Libraries at Missouri State University. Today's date is Friday, March 13th, 2015. And our special guest today is Irv Logan Jr. Irv, welcome.
Thank you.
And we're at the Green Center in University City, Missouri. So, first of all, let's start with a tough question. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Springfield, Missouri in 1944 on July the 11th.
Okay.
I don't remember much about that.
Yeah. So you were a wartime baby?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So one of the reasons we're interviewing a number of people around the state is we do have this grant from the National Park Service to learn more about people's experiences who lived along Route 66 corridor or traveled along Route 66. And so I know your grandmother, Alberta.
That's correct, Alberta Ellis.
Alberta Ellis owned Alberta's Hotel and Cafe in Springfield.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with that, with Alberta's life and businesses, because she had more than one business.
Yes.
So when did she start Alberta's?
You know, it seems to me like I was about maybe, I'm going to say I was about 11 or 12 years old.
Okay, so the mid-50s?
Yes, that would have been around 1956 or 7.
Okay.
I could be off a little bit on exactly when it was. I was pretty young.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff going on then.
Yeah. Do you remember why did you just see the need for a hotel?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
She was very resourceful. She worked for the Southwestern Bell Telephone Company at the time. So she was always looking for ways to build her own nest, if you would. And she did that by looking for opportunities in the community. There were other, it was during the days of segregation when there was very limited opportunities for African Americans to get into the bigger marketplace, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
They were kind of pigeonholed into what they could do in terms of income and job opportunities. And she was lucky that she had a really good job at the Southwestern Bell Telephone Company.
What'd she do for them?
I think she basically took care of everything. She, made sure that everything was in place and that people had what they needed to do their jobs and to clean up behind them and so forth, which was pretty typical in those days of a really good job for an African American woman.
And then, if I understand correctly, what became Alberta's Hotel and Cafe used to be like the old city hospital?
That's correct. Yeah. That's correct. And when she saw the opportunity, she managed to parlay that into a hotel, a business that serviced the African American community. Yeah. Of course, the African American community really didn't discriminate against anyone. So it was not uncommon for all kinds of people to stay at Alberta's Hotel.
How many rooms did it have? Do you know?
I can. Let's see. I'll try to count those.
Okay.
Let's see.
You got in your mind's
eye? There were probably, I'm going to say, close to 10 or 15 rooms in addition to the staff's rooms. And when I say staff, I mean those people who were either residents there who paid like monthly, or aunts and uncles and grandfathers.
So was there always an active place? There's always something going on?
There was always something going on. Yeah. It was very active. I was basically the youngest person there at the time, and I served as the bellhop and the gopher. Whatever needed to be done that no one else was doing, that was my assignment. That's what I did.
So you were like 11, 12 years old, 13 years old.
Right, exactly.
Alberta started her place.
Right. I stayed there until I was. I left home November the 22nd, 1963. So I had graduated from high school. I was probably 17 years old when I left there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And you lived in the hotel?
I lived there, yeah.
Okay, so
Well, our family was kind of unique in that we were multi-generational. My great-great-grandfather was a Civil War veteran. He had fought at Wilson's Creek.
Really?
And he built his home on what is Sherman Street now, which is, we lived a block from what is now Ozarks Tech.
Yeah.
Old Lincoln School,
Right.
which is one of the Rosenwald schools, and one of the last ones built, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
We lived in the block just south of there, and
So just a block south of Lincoln. So now that's
Yeah.
where
it's a parking lot now.
Chestnut Expressway down by.
Well, between Chestnut Expressway and the school.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically, there's nothing there.
So that parking lot there on the
there's
west
a
side of
parking
the
lot
street.
there.
Yeah.
Right, and the only thing that remains from our old neighborhood is a single pine tree, which I visit every time I go home. It's still there in the
Really?
middle of the parking lot.
Really?
Down near Clay Street, and I can't tell you how old that thing is.
Oh, I'll
It's
watch
been
for
there
it the
that
next
long.
time I drive by.
Yeah,
I'll say, oh, no, I know what that
it's
pine
still
tree
there.
is. Yeah, okay.
Everything else around it is gone,
Yeah.
except that. And why that's there, I don't know. But we lived, in everyone's house. It was not uncommon for me to stay a night in my great-great-grandfather's house. The next night I would stay at Alberta's, and the next night I'd stay at Mom's house or Dad's house, And so it was kind of like that growing up in Springfield.
Yeah. So the little I know about the African American community in Springfield. So there was a group of African Americans who lived sort of in that area, kind of Central Park, just northeast of downtown, the square.
Yes, that's correct.
And then there was another community a little bit south and east of there, back behind where the old bakery used to be, where they just tore down a couple of months ago.
Right, that's correct.
There was an African American little enclave there, and then west of town there
Right.
was an enclave.
What's known as Westport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there other communities, little neighborhoods, and?
Well, it was really kind of different because we weren't like segregated in that way.
Yeah.
So there were, like for instance, my grandmother owned a farm out on 66 west of town.
I want to ask you about that.
And we, there were small farms that African Americans had scattered throughout Greene County. And so, it's not like it is today, where most people live in the city,
Yeah.
most African Americans.
Yeah.
It was kind of we were kind of spread out, but there was a concentration in the central part of town,
Yeah. So this was off Route 66, but close to Route 66. The original alignment was down St. Louis Street, and then out through the square, and then out on West College.
That is correct.
So it's been, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 blocks north of Route 66. But you'd have travelers come in. And
Absolutely.
and
Off
they'd
of
stay-
66.
They'd stay the night. Do you have any memories of people traveling along Route 66 that stayed in Alberta? You might have
A lot of memories.
might have carried their bags upstairs for
Oh,
them
yeah,
or something.
yeah.
or-
Some of my fondest memories, of course, are of entertainers and things that came through. And I can remember the Globetrotters coming to town.
Really?
Whenever they would come to town, they would stay in the hotel. Just different people. Some of the things that were real interesting were the people that I would meet that came from other parts of the world. Because there were people who came and stayed with us, for instance, from Africa and from South America. The first African person that I met from outside of the United States was from Colombia. I had no idea there were Africans living in Colombia. And so, in the country Colombia.
Right.
And so that was, really like, wow. It kind of opened your eyes up to just how big the world was and what opportunities might be there. Everyone didn't get that experience.
Yeah, it must have been a great experience.
Oh,
too.
absolutely. And then, we had entertainers that stayed with us,
Yeah. Anybody remember?
Oh, yeah, like Ray Charles and those folks back in the day. There was something called the Chitlin Circuit.
I
don't know if you know about that
So
or
like
not.
Joplin was part of that? Was that part
Well,
of the Chitlin?
that was a little before then.
Oh.
Scott Joplin, that was kind of before those days. But the Chitlin Circuit was something I imagine, I don't really know where it originated from or that term, but it was just that segregated environment fostered, these guys coming through. And so there were entertainers that would come and stay and they would perform. And a lot of times they were performing for white audiences, but they couldn't stay where they were playing or they couldn't,
So like the Shrine Mosque might have been a big venue in
It was a
Springfield?
big venue. I saw many entertainers at Shrine Mosque that stayed at our hotel.
Yeah.
Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, the Crest, just little Stevie Wonder,
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
when he was
Yes,
13 years old.
Oh yeah, I didn't know he was entertaining when he was that young.
That's where he started.
Yeah.
With I can remember him playing Fingertips, which was his first big hit.
Uh-huh.
He was a little guy, you know, his age was small. And it was quite interesting to see all of those
Yeah.
folks come through. And then there were always educators and other folks who came through, and they might stay a night or two.
Uh-huh.
And of course, my grandfather was an excellent cook. He had been a cook in the military. And so he was the resident cook, and he was a good cook.
So he ran the cafe?
Yeah, well, the cafe was a separate business. He ran the kitchen in the hotel.
Oh.
He cooked every day.
So they'd have, if you stay at the hotel, you get a meal, you get, breakfast.
Well, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh.
Absolutely. It was more like a bed and breakfast.
Yeah.
You know.
So I didn't realize that the cafe was just a separate bit. Was it adjacent to the hotel?
No, you see, the way the hotel was constructed was you had the main part of the hotel, and then I guess as the hospital developed, they added wings on the back. You would have to check the records to see how that all developed. It was already done by the time that I was there. But in the back of the main part of the hotel was like an addition that had a long hallway, and off of that hallway were rooms. And so in one of those rooms was a barber and beauty shop, and in another was what they call the rumpus room, which was just a place for people gathered to dance and whatnot.
Yeah.
And so then there were other rooms in that area that were for people to stay in.
Yeah.
And it was all on the first floor.
Well, this is real interesting. So then the cafe was, where was it from the hotel?
The cafe itself was on Clay Street, the one that you're referring to. That was in an entirely different building.
Okay.
Alberta Snack Bar and Cafe.
Okay.
Yeah, that was on Clay Street.
Did she start that before or after she started the hotel?
I think that was probably, I don't know the answer to that question. My mother probably does, but I don't know the answer to that question because all that was in place, you see, when I was there. I think that the snack bar was probably there first, though.
Okay.
I think that's probably where she started because she also owned houses that she rented out.
So she was quite the entrepreneur.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And your grandfather was the good cook.
He was the good cook. Yes.
Great-grandfather.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the farm west of town. Where exactly was it?
If you know Old 66, there was a little roadside park just west of Springfield, about 10 miles out, near
On the south side of the road.
It was on the south side of the road, right? I don't think it's there anymore.
No, I think I've seen where it was. There was like
Right.
a little pond or something.
Yes, there was a little pond right there, and but just down the road, it was just to the east of Barnes. I guess you would call that. It was like a general store.
Yeah.
It was just to the east of that.
Yeah, I think I've seen it.
Yeah.
So
I
the
think it's
farm
still
was-
there.
The farm was on the north side of the
It
road.
was on the north side of the road, directly across from the roadside park. Now, interestingly enough, that roadside park was where a lot of people first came into contact, and that's on Old 66.
Yeah.
Came into contact with Alberta's. It was like a bed and breakfast across the street. So it was a working farm. I mean, she had chickens and all of those things, that bees and whatnot, that orchard. And so a lot of the stuff that was grown there eventually ended up going into town.
Yeah.
And being
But
served.
people would stay out there too.
Well, yes, absolutely. People would stay there too.
Okay.
Because they didn't want to go back into Springfield. And a lot of times, as African Americans traveled the road, they didn't know where they could stay.
Yeah.
But they could stop in a roadside park and rest. And they could carry they would carry their food and stuff with them. So when they would see a spot like that, they could utilize it.
Yeah.
They might not be able to go into the restaurant down the street. They
Right.
wouldn't know. So to be on the safe side, they would just stop in a place like that.
Yeah, and again, I'm learning that, back in the days of segregation, if you were an African American traveling, you would typically pack picnic lunches.
Yes,
You'd
absolutely.
You'd pack food because you weren't sure if you could,
Right.
where you could find a place to eat, a place
Right.
to sleep.
And the roadside parks served as a place where you could stop.
Yeah, okay.
And if you had problems with your automobile or something, you would you're right there, and if you saw African Americans across the street, and the word travels up and down the highway,
Right.
so people would just stop there and they would come over, and Alberta would provide them with provisions, and then tell them you can go right down the road to Barnes and get other provisions. So there was a relationship with the locals,
Yeah. So Jay, did anybody ever mention to you a thing called the Green Book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Alberta's was she was in the Green Book.
Yeah.
And we had a copy of that. It's somewhere in, I don't know where it ended up, but in all of Alberta's stuff, which some of it's still around, because my mom never went through all of it. And, she's slowly worked through some of it. But
Yeah. Little I know, was a guy named Green, and I think it was in New York City.
Yeah, I think it was back east.
He just saw the need for the black traveler, needed to know,
Right.
where you get food, where you get shelter, where you get a haircut,
That was very important. Where you can get help.
Yeah, and so he just started this thing. He did it every year for, I don't know, maybe 25, 30 years.
Yeah.
And so a few of them have been digitized. They're available online if you search for the Green Book. Do a Google search for Green Book. So
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, Alberta's was listed in there. I
Yeah.
think the rates were $3 to $4 a night was the rate.
Probably so. Yeah.
You had travelers coming through. Anybody ever talk about? So you had travelers who were both on the road on Route 66,
Right.
And also there was still passenger rail service in the
Sure, absolutely.
So someone would come in on the train. And
Absolutely.
That was probably only a couple of blocks up to Alberta's hotel.
Well, it wasn't. Yeah, it was more than a couple of blocks. But the interesting thing about it was that since my father and members of my family all worked for the railroad, and my father worked on the president's private car, they were always aware of people who needed a place to stay, and it was one of the services that the African American Pullman porters and folks would provide, is to let folks know, okay, in Springfield here's where you can go.
Yeah.
And so, again, Alberta was very entrepreneurial, and she saw that, there's a need here. There was another place in town where you could stay too, Graham's Rib Station.
Yeah.
Which was, and they worked together, because there was always enough business to go around.
Oh, of course, it wasn't highly competitive. There was enough business.
There was enough business to go around. I mean, when the interesting thing about the days of segregation, I can remember this very well. In 1960, when the Kennedy and Nixon were going to have their first debate, one of the places that they were scheduled to come to was Springfield. And it was at that time when Nat King Cole was coming to Springfield to perform for those guys at a special event. And Alberta told me about that. That was my grandmother. We always call her Alberta. She told us about that. And at the time, I was in high school, and we decided that I shared it with the kids in school. And interestingly enough, one of my white classmates, I think her name was Parks, a young lady named Parks, was involved with us in forming an NACP youth and college chapter. And she said, I don't like that. And, we got to thinking, well, it's a law. I don't know what we can do. We can protest, but I don't know if it'd make any difference. But we decided we would do that. And one of the things that I remember we did was we dressed a friend of ours up, a big guy named Manny Oliver, who later became a Globetrotter. We had him pretend like he was an African and go up to the Kentwood Arms, which is where they were going to hold the debate and all. And, don't speak any English and just, be dressed up like an African and see what would happen. And interestingly enough, they kind of let him in. And so, we made light of that, and saying that, well, it's okay for someone from somewhere else to come in who looks like us, but not us. And we live here. We're born and raised there.
So you couldn't get into the Kentwood.
And we couldn't get in, you see. I mean, it was just a law, it was the law, segregation.
But there were some blacks working at the Kentwood Arms.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you could go to work there, but you could not lay your head down in there.
Yeah.
So what we did was we formed this NACP Youth and College chapter. We got the folks in St. Louis, Margaret Bush Wilson and the Clays and all those folks who were fighting some of the same battles, here in St. Louis and at the state level, to kind of back us, to make sure that they had our backs. And we announced that we were going to picket and protest much the way they're doing today in Ferguson, about the way we were being treated. And lo and behold, and we focused on the Public Accommodations Act. And lo and behold, they were so upset that, this was going to, I think Kennedy had announced that, well, if they're going to do that, I'm not coming. And that was like, whoa,
Really?
Yeah, whoa. Because it was, it was the absurdity of the situation, because they were going to suspend the rules for that time that they were there, which meant that they were going to put the rules back into place after they left. Well, suddenly everyone woke up and said, well, that's stupid. If they're going to, disband the rules, they might as well just do away with them. And so before it was over with, eventually that's kind of what happened. It just seemed like it was absurd to continue with that kind of a policy. And so we ended up marching up to Jefferson City, and the Public Accommodations Act was passed. But the interesting thing about that is that as that all developed, I can remember my grandmother Alberta setting me down, and she says, Junior, and I was the only boy, she said, Junior, this means that all that we have worked for up to this point is going to be gone. And it'll just about disappear overnight. And I says, well, what do you mean? She said, you're doing it for the right reason.
You mean her businesses and stuff?
Right.
We're going to.
That's what she was referring to. But I asked her, what do you mean? She says, well, when people have the right to go anywhere they want to go, they don't have to go where they must go. And if it's new, folks are going to go and check it out. So that means that once all of this has gone away and you can go wherever you want to, our business will probably fade away. And that was prophetic, because not only did it happen in Springfield, but it happened across the state. And all the little towns where blacks had to go and do business in a particular place, that no longer was the case.
Yeah.
And so a lot of those little towns saw massive migrations of loss of African American businesses, and the community that developed around that all kind of went away.
Yeah. And so that did kill Alberta's business.
It was gone.
Yeah.
By the time I turned 19, it was gone.
Yeah. Now, you have a relative, an uncle or great uncle, who was a singer in the Philharmonics.
Yes, my Uncle James.
Yeah.
Logan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. So the Philharmonics were a quartet, became a quintet.
Right. They started out singing with the Grand Ole Opera in Springfield. I guess that's what it is. The Ozarks Jubilee.
Ozarks Jubilee.
That's what it's called.
Yeah, about 1955,
In the
1960.
Jubilee Theater, I believe, downtown. And I can remember growing up that meeting a lot of the now deceased famous country and western stars.
Yeah.
The one I remember in particular is playing, as a kid with just, sitting out on the stoop, was Brenda Lee, who was about my age.
Yeah.
And they had a studio down the street on Sherman Street near Chestnut. The expressway, I think, took out most of what used to be that studio. Yeah. And we would go down there and sit and listen to them practice and play, and all kinds of country and western stars, early days, would come there. I guess bluegrass would be a more proper term. Would come there.
For a while they called it hillbilly music.
Well, in the very early days, but we were all kind of hillbillies, whether you were black or white, we were living in the hills down here.
So the Ozarks Jubilee would practice on this place on Sherman.
Yeah, it was like a big old country porch.
Yeah. Now your mom told a story that I think they wanted to do a piece with the Philharmonics and Brenda Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And evidently the Philharmonics weren't welcome in the recording studio. And so your mom said that they came over to the Rumpus Room in Alberta's.
Right.
Brenda Lee came over, and I don't know, her manager or whoever. I don't know who her manager was, then her mom or somebody.
Alberta.
And they recorded in the Rumpus Room. You remember that at all?
No, I was real young,
Too young,
running around. I don't remember much about that.
Would have been a big deal. But you remember seeing Brenda Lee?
Oh, yeah. Like I said, we sat up on the porch and played together and whatnot. There were a lot of kids in our neighborhood that were, our neighborhood was integrated. That's why, the absurdity of segregation was just apparent to the youth, because we all, we were all mobile. We had bicycles. We ran across town, and it was safe.
Yeah.
And so we hung out in each other's houses, and we hung out in each other's yards, and we all played together.
Yeah.
And, but yet and still, when it came Saturday, when it was time for us to go downtown to the free movie at the Landers Theater, which was there in town, there was always a free movie on Saturday, and there was always cartoons and a cereal, Flash Garden, or, some cowboy movie, Tom Mix and those guys.
Right.
But when we got to the theater, the African American kids would have to go upstairs to what we call the crow's nest.
Second balcony.
Yeah, upstairs in the.
And it was an outside entrance too.
Yeah, it was outside entrance.
You had to climb the steps.
Yeah, we had to climb the steps to go up there.
And the Landers were the only theater that African Americans were.
That's correct. That is correct. And so, but why the adults didn't realize that the kids, didn't see the absurdity of all of that, I don't know. I mean, I guess it was just the times, and it was the law.
Yeah.
But the kids didn't know the law, and they didn't care about that, So.
And then I forget the name of the parks. They were actually segregated parks. There was
yeah, absolutely.
a black park.
Yeah, Silver Springs Park was the black park.
Did you ever play any of the other parks?
Well, we did. We played a lot of tricks in other parks, and we did play. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And and then usually it was our white friends who would say, "Come on, you're going with us," And I'm telling you, it was a time of change. It was just incredible, because our classmates, they stood up for us time and again against adversity. I mean, when we were threatened by certain segments of the community, those kids were right there with us. And to this day, a lot of us are all still very close, and we just kind of have always been that way. And it was a real unique environment in Springfield, very different. I mean, there was a lot of very good people who would stand with you no matter what. And then there was always those other folks, who just they would dig in and try to protect whatever privilege they thought they had over other folks.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're still around.
Yeah, I'm sure they are. They're here in St. Louis too.
Yeah. Did Alberta also own a place called the Crystal Lounge?
Yes, she did.
Where was this?
Well, that was on Old 66. And that was near the intersection of what is now Highway 44, and I guess they call it I don't know, it's still 66, but they call it something else.
Yeah, I think it's 266.
Yeah, 266 or bypass or something. Yeah. But it was right near there, and it was a nightclub, and we like to call them juke joints, and a lot of entertainers from beyond St. Louis came there to play and whatnot.
Did you ever hang out there? Or?
Well, I was too young to hang out, but I was not too young to clean the place up. I spent a lot of my youth working for Alberta.
Yeah.
A lot of.
So you'd have to come in like on Saturday morning after a Friday night and clean up the place.
Absolutely, and Sunday too, after church.
Yeah. Did you ever travel Route 66?
I have traveled Route 66. I'm one of the people who, I used to be on the board of the Route 66 Association.
Really? I didn't know.
Yeah. And
of Missouri, the Route 66 Association?
Yes, of Missouri.
Tommy and Glenda Pike. And,
right. Absolutely. And those are some of the good people that I talk about.
Yeah.
We have worked together on Route 66 for a long time, from the beginning.
Yeah.
And at one time, me and a fellow by the name of Bob Giles ran the Route 66 Association Motor Tour, which is still going on. Mm-hmm. And, when I worked for the state, we worked to get the old Chain of Rocks Bridge preserved to keep them from tearing it down. And we would run our motor tours up there occasionally. And I actually painted the Route 66 logo at the border with Illinois and Missouri on the old bridge. Yeah. Oh. So, it's always been, Route 66 has always had a place in my heart, because I was there. I grew up, running up and down that road. My first hot rod was one that I drove up and down the old road.
Yeah.
My friends and I, we would drive Route 66 all the way into Kansas and down in Riverton. And, you know, back in those days, you know, we were out looking for interesting people to associate with.
So you go like through Joplin and yeah.
Carthage and
Webb City.
the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Okay.
We'd make a big circle, see. We'd get off 66 down there, just south of Joplin, and then cross over into Baxter Springs and Pittsburgh and Fort Scott and Nevada, and then come back into Missouri and come back home. We'd do that on a regular basis. So we ran the road.
So did you, when you're driving, cruising, maybe 66, did you think it was different than any other road? I mean, did you know, now 66 has like this international aura, you know.
It does now, but then
Europeans they come over now and they're like, that's their vacation, is to go do Route 66 in America.
Yeah.
But back then, did you think it was like any different than 65 or?
You know, I didn't, and the reason I didn't is because that was kind of just what I knew. I didn't know the Lincoln Highway. Yeah. You know, I didn't know the other roads. All I knew was that Route 66 went to Santa Monica to the pier. Yeah. And then when I graduated from high school one day, I was going to take that trip and go all the way out there.
Did you ever do it?
Not yet, but I'm at the threshold of doing it.
Yeah. Well, I haven't done it either, but I needed to be out in Phoenix last month, and so I thought, well, I'm going to drive out, you know, and I couldn't do the whole thing, you know, where you go slow and you take the the original alignment whenever you can. I was just on I-40 most of the way, but I just got a sense of it. It's an amazing.
Oh, it is. Now I've driven it all the way into Oklahoma, but not into Texas. Yeah. So I've been that far so far, and I've been, of course, all the way up to Chicago. Yeah. So I've got to do the western end of it. Yeah. And I'm trying to finish my latest project, and I probably will try to talk my wife into doing it in that. Yeah. It's a 31 Model A Ford Roadster. That might be a little bit rough at our age, but who knows? Maybe we'll try it anyway.
Yeah. So then you came to St. Louis. Did you take 66 to go to St. Louis? You must have, I guess. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Remember anything about that? Is it what the
the thing I remember about it is when I left Springfield, it was November the 22nd, 1963. So there were still parts of the original.
So you were what, 19 then?
Yeah, I was. I was. 17.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 17 years old, I guess, and or pretty close to 18. And I drove by myself, and of course there was at that time, if you were African American, you still didn't feel comfortable once you got up around Rolla, Missouri. From Rolla to basically St. Clair, you were kind of in no man's land. Yeah. If you had problems, you really couldn't expect to get too much help. I got my first traffic ticket, as a matter of fact, in Phelps County, I guess it was, where Steelville, Missouri is, and that was an experience that lasts with you a long time, because I was with my father and my grandfather and my grandmother, and the old patrolman that stopped us, the sheriff or whoever he was, he said, "Well, we're going to take you into Steelville and book you and all that, and you'll have to pay the money, and then we'll let you go, but the judge won't be back until Monday," and it was Sunday. So you have to spend the night, and my grandfather said, "Oh no."
For speed?
Yeah, he said, "Oh no." Well, I was 15 years old with a learner's permit, and all that. So anyway, long story short, my grandfather made a telephone call, and the sheriff says, "Well, I don't know who you know, but they said you'd be down here to pay this ticket, and I wouldn't have to worry about holding you for a bond or any of that." Yeah. So that's kind of what happened. But,
you get a talking to after that about driving?
Well, I did a little bit, but they knew that I had lead foot anyway, because I've been building hot rods and whatnot there in Springfield since I was about 13 years old. So.
One of the first automobiles ever constructed was constructed in Springfield, Missouri.
Yeah, Walter Majors.
Yeah. When did he die? Was he still?
Way before my time.
You heard about him though?
Yeah, oh yeah, Walter Majors. Yeah, you definitely heard about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. and he and Henry Ford were friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What all did you hear about Walker?
Well, just that he was quite a tinkerer. He kind of reminded me of my Uncle Lewis. I don't know if you knew about Uncle Lewis Wilcock or not, but he was an early stock car racer, African American. And that's kind of where I got bit by that bug. He was down under the viaduct there off of Benton Street at Tampa. He had a garage down there, and all of the old dirt track racers there in the Ozarks would meet down there, where they would discuss racing on it and work on their cars and whatnot that race out of the Ozark Empire Fairground.
Yeah.
And so I kind of came to this hot rod thing, started from there, because I was raised with a lot of those old hot rodders around there.
So you raced
Mr.
too?
O'Reilly and all of those guys.
You do dirt track racing?
I don't do dirt track racing, but I build hot rods that are street driven.
Yeah.
It's an early American tradition.
Yeah. Have you talked to John Sellers at the History Museum on the Square? Because they're working on their next exhibit's going to be hot rods.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
I want to find out about your
Didn't know that.
Uncle Lewis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Louis Wilcock.
Lewis Wilcock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask him. See
Yeah.
what's going on with that.
The old racers, well, if there are any left around there, Larry Phillips and all those old guys, they would have known about Louis Wilcock.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll ask him about that. So you came up to St. Louis, and you worked for almost 20 years for the Missouri Department of Conservation.
That's true. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And prior to that, I worked for the McDonnell Douglas Corporation when I first came up from Springfield for about 5.5 years. And then I went to work for the 3M company in inside sales, and then quickly went into outside sales with the Xerox Corporation and a few other multinationals before I went back in, decided that I wanted to go back into public service. And, so I went to work for the University of Missouri Extension Service, and then of course the Missouri Conservation Department.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now, as you think back on your Springfield years, what's kind of your general sense of it? Was it a wonderful time?
Oh yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
It was. I tell people all the time that I lived in the best of both worlds. I mean, I lived in the days of segregation where the school was right down the street, and I went to school with my uncle who was in the 12th grade when I was in the 1st grade. So I got the experience of being around all of those folks.
Yeah.
And then Linda Brown, of course, was in Springfield when the decision came down, and we were all friends. And so when that happened, that was in 1954. In 55, I went to the Taft School. I was one of the first African Americans to go to Taft School along with them.
So what grade was that?
5th grade.
5th grade.
Yeah, I
Okay.
was in 5th grade.
So was that a big change? Do you remember? Was that like?
Oh yeah,
Something big was happening.
A big change.
Yeah.
That was a big change.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, look at these books. We would get these books later. You see.
Oh, so it was like newer books.
Yeah,
and,
but the interesting thing was
classroom.
that because we had our little white friends, we would see their books when they would bring them home from school anyway. So we were able to look at their books, and they would say, look what we're studying, and we would, do that kind of work with them.
Yeah.
So we weren't that far behind, some of us.
So then you did attend SMSU for?
I started there, and that's where I left from on November 22nd of 63.
Was it your first
First semester.
First
Yeah.
semester?
Yeah.
You want to tell that story of why you left?
Well, as I remember, I was in H.D. Lightfoot's history class, and I just wasn't getting it. What I was hearing, what I was reading, just wasn't jiving with what I had been told by some folks who had been involved with some of the
About American history.
about American history.
Yeah.
It was just slanted and just different.
Yeah.
I guess it was the party line, and I just wasn't buying it. So I said, well, I guess it's time for me to leave here. And so that day, I made the decision to just leave, and I had a few bucks in my pocket. I had a running hot rod, and it was a nice warm day, and away I went. I had a promise of a job if I got to St. Louis, and I just said, I'm gone.
You never came back?
I never came back. I graduated from St. Louis University
Yeah.
a number of years later.
Yeah.
And I never stopped going to school. I mean, as soon as I got here, I enrolled in school. So I've been to virtually every college in St. Louis. But I was a person who never really focused on any one particular subject, because I'd get interested in something and then I'd go enroll and maybe do 2 or 3 courses in that.
So Route 66 went through St. Louis too.
Yes.
When you were living in St. Louis, did you sort of maintain your affection for the Mother Road?
Well, yeah, because I knew of certain places on the Mother Road that like when I knew about the bridge, of course.
Yeah.
And
Chain of Rocks.
The Chain of Rocks Bridge, the old Chain of Rocks Bridge with the crook in the middle.
Yeah.
And I knew about places out on Watson Road,
Yeah.
the old drive-in theaters. And
was it Dawes custard, frozen custard?
Yeah, well, you're probably talking about Ted Drew's.
Ted Drew's, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about Ted Drew's. And then, so but Route 66 is like a web through St. Louis.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're always, either close to or running on the old 66.
Right.
If you're running down Lindbergh, you're on it. If you're running down Manchester Road, you're on it. If you're running down Lee May Ferry, you're on it.
Right.
So, it's a big part of St. Louis.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you. If there's anything else you want to add, or?
Well, just, I think it's important work to preserve the history and culture. You can tell that I'm really rooted in Americana. I really am rooted in the history, the true history of both our country and our community, our state. I think that we really need to make sure that we capture as much as we can of our past. We're a young country. Mm-hmm. In '93, I witnessed the breach, I should say, of the water as it rose across Columbia Bottoms here in St. Louis. I and one of my agents were standing there when all of that happened on the day that they say the levee broke, but really it was a sand boil that ate out and poured water across 5,500 acres in a matter of an hour or two. And when you see that kind of change take place, it's historic. And what that water did, and that's supposed to be a 500-year flood, it gives you an idea that, well, we haven't even been here 500 years, so how do you know that's a 500-year flood? You see, I mean, you can see the marks are much higher than where that water went in that 500-year flood, and it could go higher the next time.
Yeah.
We don't know. We haven't been here long enough. So it's important that we preserve our history. We're a young country, and we have the fortune of being able to capture this early history because we're in the early days of our time here.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're trying to do, and hear real stories about people who lived and traveled along Route 66.
And it's important work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So let me ask you one final question. So, Route 66 has achieved almost like a mythic status. I think you go about anywhere in the world, and if you just went to a square or something and started asking people, Route 66 mean anything to you? They go, oh yeah, Route 66. I'm not a scholar of Route 66, but I think for most people, Route 66 was numbered in 1926 in Springfield, Missouri. That's where it got its first birthplace of Route 66. It took a few years to get it paved and everything, so really by the time everybody got rolling, pardon the pun, it was Depression era. So you got the whole 30s, Dust Bowl, Grapes of Wrath, Okies going to California. That's the first phase of Route 66. Then you got the war years. And you got a lot of troop, Fort Leonard Wood, but for most people, I think when they think Route 66 is this mythic icon, it's the post-war years. Mm-hmm. And, it'd be kind of interesting study, but you said, describe what you're imagining here. I think what they'd see is a white father and mother, 2 kids in the back seat, driving a Chevy, going down Route 66 on vacation. That's the myth, I think.
Yeah.
What's your sense of that myth? What's the relationship? What's your sense of the relationship between that myth, if that is indeed the myth? That's my sense of the myth, with what the real reality is.
The myth was also about migration, which is what you referred to earlier when you talked about the grapes of wrath and the Hopis moving west. But there was also another migration, and that was of the African Americans who were leaving the South and also had to come down the road, and for the most part, they went all the way to the coast.
Yeah, so there was jobs in California.
There was jobs.
A lot, especially during the war.
There was freedom.
Yeah.
More importantly,
yeah.
there was freedom. So the further west that you went, the freer that you got. You see? And so you have a large population of African Americans who made it all the way to the coast and experienced freedom and were able to come back and visit. A lot of times, they traveled a lot back and forth. And that's kind of, when I talk about meeting the man from Colombia, from down south, those are the kind of things that he talked about, was that it's so different out west. It's so different further south. When we say south, we mean south of Mexico, you see. And it's so different. And there are people out there who are very different than they are around here, or, so it was always this, there's something out there beyond here that, the grass always looks greener.
Right.
So folks were always...
Route 66 was a road of opportunity for blacks.
For African Americans, that's very true.
But getting there was, I'll have to go back and look at some of these green books, but I bet when you get out into New Mexico and Arizona, there weren't a lot of services for blacks, I'm guessing, in those states. So you really had to, it was almost like going through a desert. A desert, a service desert.
Except that you were, when you got out to where the Native Americans were, a lot of times that's where you went, along the old road. Alberta was part, Native American, and we had, she lived in Albuquerque for a while, and so we had connections along the road. You had to know people, you had to form relationships, and you had to know where those were as you traveled. And so even though it was a desert, there were people out there who were aligned with the purpose of freedom. They realized.
Well, how do you think we can do a better job of telling that side of the Route 66?
Well, I don't know west of here, because I've not, like I said, I've not traveled past Oklahoma, but I do know that, there were people who were willing to assist you. And they weren't always just people of color. You see, there were people who did not see color when it came to assisting each other. They worked together. Our family is so racially mixed that it doesn't, the color of your skin means nothing. We've seen, you can't look at someone and tell what their genes are. And we're just getting to that point where, if we start pulling DNA on folks, no telling who you're allowed to end up being kin to. And that's America. You see. And so I see that the road ultimately will lead us to freedom, and I think that's what people saw.
True freedom.
True freedom. The freedom of the road, because like, to give you an example now, you hear me talk about this old hot rod that I have, and I've been in a lot of states, and my wife happens to be Caucasian in complexion, and we have never encountered any kind of animosity. And I'm telling you, we've been in Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, you name it, and everywhere we go in an old hot rod, all we get is smiles and how you folks doing? Where are you going? And that's true of the old road. When folks see you on the old road, it's like that, So it's all family at that point. You see.
I also think that Route 66 during the war years needs a lot more research and investigation. That's almost like, okay, we understand the Jodes and Grace of Wrath. We understand that. We understand the post-war. Everybody wants to go out and get on the road and, explore. with those war years, a lot of traffic.
A lot of traffic. Alberta there were a lot of troops that stayed at Alberta's hotel.
Yeah.
From Fort Leonard Wood, and a lot of those guys that came from all over the United States ended up marrying girls from Springfield.
Yeah.
And whatnot.
And even O'Reilly Hospital there on
Yeah.
North Glenstone, which is part of Route 66,
Yeah,
the original alignment. Well, I've only been in Springfield for 3 years, but there are a lot of people that said the reason I'm here is because I had an uncle or a brother who was in O'Reilly, and they came to be with them and they stayed.
Yeah. You'll
So-
find that in the African American community too.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, Fort Leonard Wood soldiers, when they would go on R&R, they had very limited choices. They could go to St. Louis or they could go to Springfield. A lot of the African Americans would go to Springfield because that was the closest place where they could see a significant number of African Americans.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again. Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.